I have to say, I feel like I'm living in a parallel universe whenever I hear the government talk about housing. You know, I hear all these grand plans, and then I look at my own area, and I think we'll have one additional council house this year. I think we got one or two last year, and all the rest is outsourced. And now you're planning to outsource more with the LDA and privatise public land. But the particular issue I want to raise is the fraud that is the Residential Tenancies Act that is coming into the Dáil today, in terms of a pretence by the government that they're going to protect tenants from eviction in the context of the current pandemic. The extension of that protection is to a tiny, limited cohort who have got into arrears directly as a result of COVID income loss. But everybody else, there's now green light being given to the landlords and the vulture funds to evict people. You may have read, Taoiseach, in the Times and heard on the radio last week the details of the case that I've raised with you and the Housing Minister repeatedly. A textbook case of tenants being mass evicted by vulture funds. Nothing to protect them. How can you possibly justify people being evicted into homelessness, into less safe environments of the homelessness system on April the 5th, just because the 5-kilometre rule is changed, when we still have a pandemic raging? And you're going to allow vulture funds, and this is just one example of the many that are out there, of unscrupulous corporate landlords and vulture funds for money and profit and no other reason, evicting decent people who've always paid their rent into homelessness, and you're going to allow it, instead of doing what we're asking as a minimum, is to extend the eviction ban until the pandemic has passed.
A range of questions there, but first of all, will I say that we're not outsourcing house building. Deputy Boyd Barrett will be 9,500 of the 12,500 social housing built this year will be built by local authorities and the approved housing social bodies. So it will be a very large social housing provision this year in terms of building. We're not outsourcing that at all, as you asserted. I would also say there's no green light to evict people via this legislation. That is wrong. You said the same the last time when this legislation was introduced, and it didn't happen. In terms of the scale and in terms of how you presented the argument. The Residential Tenancies Bill 2020 was enacted, came into operation October 24th, and it sought to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on tenants, to support the government's efforts to restrict the movement of people in order to suppress the spread of the virus while level 5 restrictions were in place. And there was very strong legal advice given to the Minister in terms of the parameters around which the legislation could be grounded and put into law and free of any potential challenge, a successful challenge against it. And that was an important aspect that the Minister simply had to take on board. And the legislation, broadly speaking, has proved to be effective, and its extension is important. Could I also say that there'll be 12,750 houses built this year. Were targeted to be built. 3 months of COVID has reduced output, unquestionably because of the level 5 restrictions that we have imposed. The government's been in office since July last only, but has made very significant commitments. You said not one house. There was quite a number of voids brought back in your council area. The dramatic initial programme that the Minister took, funded by the government last July, brought close to 3,000 houses back into play, social houses. And yet you come in with the propaganda that one house built, etc., etc. So we'll do everything we can to build social housing and get them built in 2021 at far higher levels. Obviously, COVID has impacted on that, and the deputies know that, but choose to ignore the impact of COVID in the first 3 months of the year on housing construction.